In Ghana, in West Africa, there is a tribe called the Akan. And they have a saying that says, "It is not forbidden to fetch what is at risk of being left behind." It is not forbidden to fetch what is at risk of being left behind. This principle of a people carrying their past into the future is symbolized by a bird that looks like this. And I bet in that tech booth, that is not a bird. The bird looks like this. And I bet they could look it up. It's called a sankofa, Sankofa, sankofa. And if you're able to see this bird, and you all have devices, you can probably look it up too, sankofa. This is a picture of a bird that's facing forward, but if you look carefully, its neck is turned backward. And in its beak, it's retrieving an egg. The bird's feet are clearly facing forward, but it's looking backward at what it might have left behind that it wants to protect. To have a spirit of sankofa, therefore, is to move forward toward a new and uncertain future, but not to abandon the treasures from the places you have come from. There is a saying that actually sits at the very center of the Gospel of Matthew. If you split it down the middle, the verse that you land on is chapter 3, verse 52, where Jesus says this: "Every scribe who has been trained for the kingdom of heaven is like the master of a household who is bringing out treasure from what is new and what is old." Although the cultural contexts between the Akan tribe in Ghana and a first century rabbi are quite different, they seem to agree on one thing. We find our way forward toward a more sacred future only when we remember to carry with us the treasures of the past. You may have noticed that we live right now in a time where the future is very uncertain. And frankly, I'm not sure that there's ever a time where that is not true. But we also live right now in a country where we are deeply divided on what constitutes the treasures from our past. Should we, for example, celebrate the people who helped end slavery, who broadened the definition of who could participate fully in the governance of this country? Are those the treasures of our past? Or would it be better to forget that those people ever existed and to write a story in which the people and the kind of people who are currently in power have always been in power? Are we able to remember other times in our country's history where people have struggled against the forces of empire? Or will we cave to the false belief that the history of our country has just been one unbroken line where those on top get higher and higher, and the borders of the hierarchy can never be moved? If the Akan are right, and it is not forbidden to fetch what is at risk of being left behind, then how is it that we can carry those memories, both personal and cultural and historical memories, how can we carry them forward into a better world? The politicization of the past, the dangers of forgetting what has actually happened, seems like a new problem, but it's not. We wouldn't have so many proverbs in many different cultures about the importance of remembering where you came from if people actually remembered where they came from. We only make rules when people have broken them. The psalm that you heard read this morning, for example, begins with the writer remembering all of the ways that God has held the people and carried them through. It starts off like this: "I heard an unknown voice say to me, 'I relieved your shoulder of the burden. Your hands were freed from carrying the basket.' In distress, you called, I answered you. I answered you in the secret place, a place of thunder. The people that God is talking to in this psalm, the people remember in their bodies, not just in their minds, but in their bodies, what it was like, what it felt like when God lightened their burdens, when God freed up their hands, what it was like, what it felt like to hear the voice of God saying, I am with you, what it tasted like when God offered food in the midst of famine, words in the middle of a terrifying silence. The psalm speaks of God longing to do this again, to satisfy God's people with sweetness, like the sweetness of honey. Maybe you remember times like that too. Maybe you remember a time when you thought to yourself, now I have all that I need. Maybe you remember a time when you felt light, you felt free, you felt held, you felt heard. A time when all you could pray was, thank you, thank you, thank you. Because there were no other words to say. I hope that you can remember a time such as that. And if you can remember a time such as that, you know what the psalmist also knows. It is easier for human beings to forget those moments than to hold on to them and remember them and carry them forward. Life keeps going. With all of its distresses and distractions, life keeps going, and we start to believe what the culture around us that values that individual so much, what that culture tells us. We start to believe that we are alone, and we do things on our own, and we rise and fall on our own merits, and when we cry out, it doesn't really matter because nobody's listening anyway. We might still hear the voice of God saying, as it does in the psalm, oh, my people. Oh, that my people would listen to me and walk in my ways. But that voice somehow, in all the distractions and distress, that voice gets drowned out. And we start to forget. Like that Sankofa bird, our feet are planted firmly toward the future, but the connections that we have with the one who liberates us, the one who lightens us, the one who answers us when we call, we forget to look back and carry those treasures with us to safety. The gospel passage that you heard read this morning takes place when Jesus and the disciples are headed toward a future from a pretty miraculous past. Jesus has just fed 5,000 people. He's insisted that the disciples not only send the people to the grocery store to get their own food, but that they organize and feed people with what they themselves have. This has just happened, 5,000 people, miracle. So Jesus sends the disciples ahead in the boat, and he stays behind a little bit to say goodbye to the people who are still lingering at the community meal and to spend a little bit of time in prayer. The disciples don't get very far, as you can see from this picture, which is still not a bird. They're sailing their boat into the wind, into a storm, into a pretty tumultuous sea. And then early in the morning, while it is still dark, the disciples see Jesus walking toward them on the water. Now, whenever I have imagined this story, I have pictured the disciples looking forward toward their destination and seeing Jesus walking back to pick them up. But this time, as I reread the story, I started to wonder, what if I've got my literary geography all wrong? What if when Jesus is walking toward their boat, he's not walking toward them from the future, but he's actually behind their boat, having gotten a late start, and he too is walking against the wind, trying to catch up with the disciples. Hear me out. You know what happens next in this story. Peter, that headstrong disciple, says to Jesus, "If it's really you, tell me to come out and walk on the water too." And Jesus nods, and Peter tries, and then he notices that strong wind. And he starts to sink, and Jesus lifts him up. They both get into the boat, and all together, Jesus and the disciples move forward into whatever God has in store for them next. And for that moment, the chaos of the waves, the stubbornness of the wind, the terror of the disciples, for that one moment, it's stilled. And for that one moment, between where they have been and where they are going, there is peace. Sometimes the divine is not in front of us, but behind us, nudging us into a future that we are reluctant to embrace or even take one small step towards. So many times in my life, I have experienced God as the one who reminds me to take heart, to have courage, not to be afraid of what comes next. What if in this story, Jesus is not already in the future that he's holding for the disciples, but behind them, reminding them of where they came from? What if that strong wind that's blowing in their face that they can't seem to overcome, that prevents them from making any forward progress on the journey, is actually pushing the disciples to look behind them, to turn around and remember the places they've already been with Jesus, and to join him in walking from the miracles of the past through the chaos of the present toward a future that is full of grace, full of healing? What if when Peter is out there trying to walk on the water, he notices not only the chaos of the waves, but a strong wind that is pushing him back into the arms of Jesus? The arms of Jesus, a place so vulnerable that he'd almost rather sink into chaos than remember what that embrace feels like. When we are at our best, we are like that Sankofa bird, standing where our feet are, heading toward new places, but carrying with us the spiritual treasures of our lives. When we are at our best, we allow God to knit our past and our present and our future all together. And when those things start to become unraveled again, when we forget the faithfulness of God, we can become blind to the love that surrounds us, even in the midst of chaos and distress. And then, when we start to unravel, we start to sink into our own hopelessness, our own fear, our own worries that maybe we really are all alone. But hear the good news. God is always reminding us of whose we are. When storms arise, we can remember the one who hovered over the face of the waters at creation and brought order out of chaos. When storms arise, we can remember the one who led the people through the sea toward freedom and swallowed up all of the things that would hold them back. When storms arise, we can remember the voice that speaks amid the whirlwind, amid chaos and confusion and death, the one who is unwilling to let go of us no matter what. There is in my family a song. It's a song by the Rolling Stones called "You Can't Always Get What You Want." You know that song? An oldie but a goodie. When my mother-in-law went back to school, she wrote an essay about how much she loved that song, "You Can't Always Get What You Want." And then a few years later, when she died, we played that song at her funeral. When I got married and she wasn't there, we played that song in her honor. When somebody in my family had a medical emergency and I was freaking out, the paramedics said to me, "Well, it's like what they say. You can't always get what you want, but if you try, you might get what you need." When I was walking into a place to sign paperwork for an adoption in my family, worried that everything was going to unravel. I walked in the building, and on the radio was playing, "You can't always get what you want. But if you try sometimes, you might find you get what you need." For reasons I don't really understand, that song in my family is a touchstone. We use it, and I think God uses it, as a reminder that God is faithful, even, especially when things seem to be falling apart. It is important to remember the past, and it's important not to get stuck there. In this story, the disciples think Jesus is a ghost, but he's not a ghost. He's not a pale shadow of something that used to be and is gone. Jesus still lives. Jesus still stretches out his hand to lift people up, calling us to take heart, to find courage, to walk with him from the miracles of the past to the miracles that the future still holds. So friends, when you need God to hold you, may you look back like the Sankofa, with your feet firmly planted toward your next steps and your eyes looking at the love that you have carried with you all this time. When you need the courage to step into the chaos of the present moment, may you keep your eyes upon Jesus. And when you need to move forward toward a future of healing and hope, may you carry with you those spiritual treasures that are old and new at the same time, trusting that you are not alone, that we can move forward together, staying awake, and alert and alive to the one that reminds us that he will carry us all safe to shore.